All right. Well, today got 50 key video games. On the back, it says this volume contains 50 of the most important video games that have contributed significantly to the history, development, or culture of the medium, providing an overview of video games from their beginning to the present day. This volume covers a variety of historical periods and platforms, genres, commercial impact, artistic choices, context of play, typical and atypical representations, uses of games for specific purposes, uses of materials or techniques, specific subcultures, repurposing, transgressive aesthetics, interfaces, moral, ethical impact, and more. So Pong 1972, was Pong first, is the title. And let's read. The significance of Pong can be simply stated in as few as 3 words. It was first. This claim alone should be sufficient to stake a claim to a place among the 50 key video games. But it begs a more important question. First at what? Certainly not the first video game. In summer 1972, when Al Alcorn installed the first version of Pong at Andy Capp's Tavern, a bar located not far from Atari in Sunnyvale, California, one could already count a handful of predecessors, from Higginbotham's Tennis for Two, 1958, to Space War by Steve Russell, Martin Greats, Peter Sampson, and Wayne Whittingham, 1962, and on to Ralph Baer's Brown Box and the Magnavox Odyssey based on Baer's machine. Baer himself directly answered the question of whether Pong was first, whether it counted as the first game, and accordingly, whether Nolan Bushnell, Atari's founder, could be considered its inventor. In his book, Video Games in the Beginning, Baer presented documents and recollections about his own role in the history of video games, centered on his work at Sanders Associates that led to the first patent for what he called a TV gaming display. In his original notes, dated September 1st, 1966, nearly 6 years before Pong, he anointed himself the father of video games by definition, thinking himself to be the first to file for a patent. But what did that conclusion leave for Bushnell and Pong? According to Baer, Pong might have been the first video game, but Bushnell could nonetheless claim to be the inventor of something else. He had the vision to introduce video games into the arcade environment. From Baer's perspectives, Pong's status in video game history was not about inventing the video game, it was about inventing the video game industry. Soon after, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded Atari Inc. In June 1972, they hired an engineer named Al Alcorn. The 3 engineers had worked together in the Videophile group at Ampex, a San Francisco Bay Area company that played a crucial role in the invention and commercialization of audio and video recording technologies beginning in the late 1940s. The deft combination of analog and digital engineering they took from Ampex and brought to Atari would become the foundation for the new game company's products and profits. The first assignment Bushnell gave to Alcorn was to design an electronic ping-pong game that could be played in game arcades. Alcorn later learned that the project Bushnell gave him was a ruse. Quote, a simple video game which we now know was just an exercise, end quote, to break him into game design. Alcorn delivered Pong, which, after successful testing in a local bar called Andy Capp's Tavern, became the first successful mass-produced commercial arcade video game. Describing Pong, even in this more constrained fashion, as first is at once both accurate and misleading. Even if, as a finished game, Pong probably struck most players as anything but problematic. The origins of this simple game raise questions about the video game as occupying a space straddling contemporary computer and television technology. Pong is a key game for video game history. Its status as first game or following Baer as the progenitor of an industry requires that we understand what kind of game it was. So, the next mini chapter or bullet point it says is what kind of game was Pong. I'm going to skip that. And then it talks about the development of Pong. I'm going to skip that. Let me read a couple of lines from the final bullet point, and it's titled Pong's Success. Pong's success as the game that launched the electronic arcade industry has been credited to the unrepentant simplicity of its design. 3 short sentences on the cabinet's faceplate told players everything they needed to know. Put a quarter into the machine. A ball will be served. Move the paddle to hit the ball back and forth. As I have argued, Pong's success reversed the failure of Computer Space by stepping away from the complexity of computer games. Unlike Computer Space's beautiful fiberglass cabinet, the Pong prototype was set in an ugly square box covered with orange paint and wood veneer, and the simple plate for control knobs and instructions. As game and as aesthetic design, Pong and Computer Space were opposites. As an engineering design, however, Pong followed Computer Space in its modularization and optimization of hardware. Let me see what else it says. I think that's all I want to read about Pong. I mean, it's a boring ass game. What else? But I think it's clear that this is kind of the first successful arcade cabinet games. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. Again, I don't want to read every single word because I want y'all to buy this book and I don't want to spoil too much. I just want to kind of get y'all interested. I want y'all to support these guys. All right. So, let's talk about... What do we got here? Can you read that? Let's talk about Space Invaders. Space Invaders is on page 245. Let's talk about Space Invaders. I think I still play this in the arcade with the girlfriend. All right. Let's read Space Invaders. 1978. Few games revolutionized the video game landscape like Space Invaders from Taito. And even fewer games have created such a long-lasting legacy. While Computer Space, from 1971, launched the coin-op industry in the early 70s, and Pong raised awareness of video games and pop culture, the truth is that the commercial viability of coin-op gaming was in a slump until Space Invaders revitalized the scene. The game literally propelled a niche novelty into a large-scale industry. So... Looks like it was in development in 1977. Let's talk about development a little bit. Let's talk about development. Development on Space Invaders began in 1977. Tomohiro Nishikado affirms, quote, "For the Invader game, I was inspired by Atari's Breakout game," close quote. He noticed that players gained significant gratification from clearing an entire screen of blocks. Further discussing Breakout from '82, Nishikado states, quote, "It was a game that made you want to play it again and again. I thought to myself, how can I make this into a new game? We thought maybe a battle-based game would be good. Initially, we considered tanks, planes, ships, and then we considered various targets," end quote. Unlike Atari's Breakout, Nishikado imagined a game where the targets fired back. Quote, "We tried it with soldiers and it was great fun, but people shouldn't be shot." Close quote. Taito, as a company, decided that they did not want its games to present, quote, "an image of war," close quote. Interesting. With humans and war machines out, Nishikado decided to pursue a science fiction angle. Originally, he was inspired by the popular anime Space Battleship Yamato from 74 through 75. Nishikado continues, quote, "About that same time in the U.S., there was talk of Star Wars coming out in 77, so we decided to go with something like a droid, which moves like a human but isn't a human. But the game didn't really click, and I wasn't convinced," close quote. The droids were too human-like and didn't work, but Nishikado still believed that the sci-fi theme could be salvaged. At the time, the song Space Monster by the Japanese female pop music duo Pink Lady topped the music charts, and this became the game's working title. Since the cabinet artwork was designed during this period of development, it explains why the side of the cabinet displays colossal human-like monsters that are absent from the actual game. Next, Nishikado considered the addition of marine life something very important to Japanese island culture. He reveals, quote, "When I was little, War of the Worlds by author H.G. Wells was very popular. So having grown up seeing that, I thought that aliens were octopuses. I looked up at the sky and wondered whether aliens may come and attack us. That's why we use octopus as the biggest enemy in Space Invaders. I drew a monster like an octopus. Then I thought about a squid as another sea creature. Then there's the crab, although it looks a bit weird. And a UFO," close quote. While Nishikado had worked with fellow team members on previous projects, he designed Space Invaders solely on his own. He fabricated all the hardware in its entirety, including engineering the microcomputer from the first step through to completion. As a result, Nishikado is truly the, quote, father of Space Invaders. Taito executives did not have big expectations for Nishikado's game, and initially the title received little fanfare. A successful coin op at the time moved a few thousand machines, so the industry took notice when Taito manufactured more than 500,000 cabinets in the first year alone. In Space Invaders, players attempt to protect planet Earth from an advancing alien armada. Stacked in 6 columns consisting of 8 aliens each, the intruders move back and forth in an organized manner, marching down a row at a time until ultimately landing on Earth and ending the game. The player slides in a horizontal manner, shooting invaders while dodging enemy fire and hiding behind any of the 3 shields before they are damaged and penetrated. With each enemy movement, the machine produces a thumping sound, one of 4 notes that some consider the first time that music in a video game was in sync with the actions taking place on screen. The audio and video working in tandem lured players deeper into the arcade experience. As enemy ranks are diminished, the alien's encouragement gains momentum, and the audio track speeds up, making for a very dramatic effect, one of much urgency to the player. While such an effect could be chalked up to solid game design, it was actually the result of technical limitations and luck. As the enemy count was reduced, the maxed out central processing unit, CPU, had less work to compute, which freed up memory space and allowed the game to run more efficiently. Recognizing the value the happy accident offered, Nishikado left it unchanged. Prior games simply moved static graphic sprites about the video screen. Nishikado alternated the sprites to give movement to the enemies' appendages, and as a result, the game was the first to feature fully animated characters. Space Invaders is often incorrectly credited with being the first game to display high scores, but Seawolf from Midway 1976 recorded and displayed top scores 2 years earlier. Speed Race from 74 also awarded extra driving time when a predetermined score was reached. Space Invaders may not have been the first, but its creator certainly advanced the concept. Nishikado expands, quote, "If you see the high score, it encourages people to want to beat those scores and do better. It's what they called a replay appeal," close quote. The next bullet point is reception, Fallout, expansion, and yeah, that's it on Space Invaders. All right, let's read one more game from 50 Key Video Games. Let's go in chronological order here. I think Pac-Man is one I want to read next. So after Space Invaders, there's Adventure from 1979. I'm going to skip that one. Let's go to Pac-Man, because that's a big one, right? Let's go to Pac-Man from 1980. This is on page 190. Let's read about Pac-Man. Pac-Man. I want some cool facts on Pac-Man, don't you? I find this pretty cool. All right. Let's read about Pac-Man, the birth of an icon. In the decades since it was first released into arcades across the world, much has been written about the origins of Namco's Pac-Man. Much of it apocryphal? I don't know how to say that. By way of example, the game's designer, Toru Iwatani, has claimed on numerous occasions that the inspiration for the game's titular character came during a business lunch in the shape of a partly eaten pizza. However, while the designer has since been photographed recreating this apparently seminal moment for publicity purposes and the story has passed into gaming folklore, in other interviews, Iwatani revealed a rather more complex relationship between the character's name and the visual design, which relate, respectively, to the onomatopoeic sound of the mouth moving in a quick succession, paku paku, and a rounded version of kuchi, the Japanese character for mouth. That said, it is worth noting that, neat though this explanation is, it omits an important detail that reminds us of the transnational flows of media and meanings, as well as the public nature of arcade gameplay. For its initial Japanese release, the game and its lead character were actually called Puckman, and it was only after Namco's U.S. subsidiary intervened to note this was something of an invitation to arcade-going vandals that the tweaked sobriquet we know today was born. And let's see. The next bullet is called Mazes. The next one is Monsters. A Game of Two Halves. What else can I read from this one? Let's go with the next bullet point, which is mazes. I find this interesting. At its heart, Pac-Man places the player in a maze filled with 240 pellets, sometimes known as dots. The aim of the game is to clear stages by consuming each pellet. 4 monsters, often referred to as ghosts, serve as antagonists and hunt down Pac-Man along the corridors of the maze. Consuming one of the special power pellets turns the tables by giving Pac-Man the temporary ability to devour the monsters, while every object consumed, including bonus items such as cherries, strawberries, or keys, adds to the player's score. Among the game's innovations are its coffee break sequences that punctuate the action between stages. Brief though these animations might be, they are often considered the first cutscenes. From a design perspective, being a product of what is sometimes known as the golden age of technological innovation and wider cultural penetration in arcade video games, it is tempting to simply lump Pac-Man with its contemporaries such as Asteroids, Space Invaders, or Namco's own Galaxian. However, even though this era was still in its infancy, in 1980, Pac-Man's design and ethos was self-consciously bucked trends in a number of important ways. As Iwatani recalls, Pac-Man was, in part, a reaction to the games that dominated the arcade at that time. Quote, all the computer games available at the time were of the violent type, war games and space invader types, close quote. And so, borrowing from Popeye, the ability to become more powerful by eating, and by placing consumption at its center, Iwatani's response to these dominant tropes in game design can be read as a literal reversal as shooting becomes eating. More technically, as Wadrup Fruin notes from 2020, this can be understood as an inversion of the meaning of objects colliding in a game's world, and so what might be seen as bullet and explosion in Space Invaders is reconceived as food and consumption in Pac-Man. Very cool. While Iwatani explicitly rethought some aspects of contemporary arcade design, Pac-Man was not willfully contrary. and followed the trend toward accessibility and immediacy that was, at least in part, a consequence of the received wisdom that Nolan Bushnell and Nutting Associates' failure to commercialize commuter space had been due to the complexity of its controls. At first sight, Pac-Man does seem an enticingly straightforward proposition. Of course, this is not quite the same as saying the game is easy. And Pac-Man's economical, audiovisual, and hardware interface bellies the complexity of gameplay opportunities that lurk beneath its colorful, inviting surface. As Wade puts it, quote, Pac-Man is a simple game to learn, but difficult to master. The rules are straightforward, and all of the requisite info about the game's status is available to the player at any given point in time, close quote. Pac-Man's clear objective, deep gameplay, and what might initially appear to be the inscrutability of its monster AI routines do indeed contrive to create a game of considerable difficulty. Moreover, while the maze does not conceal any part of its spatiality and is unchanging within and across all levels, its multiple paths and passages render the game extremely accommodating and perhaps even demanding of considered tactics and strategies in place of haphazard ad hoc play. Now let's read the next bullet point. I'm enjoying this. The next bullet point is monsters. There can be no doubt that the maze is an important feature of Pac-Man and provides a literal frame for the gameplay. However, it is clear that the core challenge to the player comes from the monsters, where the maze can lead the player into danger. It is also the route out of it. The monsters, on the other hand, are singularly focused on Pac-Man's demise. As Iwatani notes, quote, well, there's not much entertainment in a game of eating, so we decided to create enemies to inject a little excitement and tension. The player had to fight the enemies to get the food, and each of the enemies has its own character. I wanted the monsters to surround Pac-Man at some stage of the game, but I felt it would be too stressful for a human being like Pac-Man to be continually surrounded and hunted down. So I created the monsters' invasions to come in waves. Close quote. It is for these reasons that contemporary analyses, such as the encyclopedic investigations presented by Hodges and in Pittman's Pac-Man dossier, dedicate so much time and expend so much labor dissecting the AI and behaviors of the monsters. Rather than reading the behaviors from the screen, these investigations look inside the code to learn the routines that set out how the monsters will behave. As Matthias notes, the pathfinding rules that define the movement through the maze are actually surprisingly simple, and yet, because they are each different and operate in tandem, there is a richness and dynamism that not only gives rise to the perceived waves of attack and retreat that Iwatani speaks of, but also imbues each monster with its own character. While the blue, orange, and pink monsters seem to take circuitous routes to variously get in front of or behind Pac-Man, the red monster, known as Shadow Blinky in the English localization, is guided by a pathfinding rule that has it take the most direct route. Interesting. As such, the monsters appear to work as a team, mounting coordinated attacks to head off Pac-Man, with Shadow often seen as the leader. Very cool. Whether it is because they add the excitement and tension that make Pac-Man a game with challenge, because the choreography of their behaviors variously coordinates and differentiates them, or because they can transform from enemy to prize, we might reasonably assume that the game of Pac-Man is ultimately concerned with unraveling the algorithms that dictate the readable personalities, movements, and responses of the monsters. After all, as Matthias puts it, quote, without the ghost, there was no challenge in clearing a maze of pellets, and hence no game. Close quote. The next bullet point is memorization. And then the next bullet point is a game of two halves. So I'll save those for y'all's to read on your own if you get the book. So there you go, guys. I read 3 games from 50 Key Video Games. Doing some early years there. I'm going to pick this back up and read maybe 3 or 4 more.